All right. Hey everybody, how's it going? So we're trying something new here. You might notice that my voice will sound a little different. But it's only because I've been trying this I've known about Audacity for a while. And I kind of forgot that I had it installed on my computer. So we're gonna use this to make book recordings if it goes well. If I'm happy with the results, if you guys like it, let me know in the comment section. Your feedback is always welcome. Just like, dislike. If you're too shy to say anything, that's fine. Just like or dislike. Anyway, so this is it, chapter 25. Chapter 25. Jace Beleren. Jace planeswalked back to Ravnica, directly into Vraska's royal bedchamber. He had been hoping to find her there, and hoping there were things they could do there together. But wasn't exactly surprised to find that the Golgari Queen wasn't confining herself to her chambers in the middle of the day. He exited the room and nearly walked right into Storev. "Excuse me, Master Beleren," she whispered. "I was not aware you were here." "I just got back." "And will you be staying with us long?" "That's up to your queen, I suppose. For the time being, I have nowhere else to go." "Ah, yes. Your embassy was destroyed." "It was. And in any case, it's not my embassy anymore. Whatever's left of it, save for a handful of books, belongs to the Firemind now." "Of course." "The Queen?" "Yes." Where is she?" "Wherever it suits her, I imagine. I do not question the movements of my sovereign." "Storev, you're taking a simple question and making it complicated. I think you know my feelings for Queen Vraska, and her feelings for me. I simply want to see her." "I am aware of all these things, Master Beleren." Jace waited, but the erstwhile said nothing more. Beginning to get cross, he said, "You're intentionally obfuscating. Another thing I don't doubt you're aware of is my abilities. Perhaps you think they won't work on the undead, but you're wrong on that account. Tell me where Vraska is, or I'll take the information from your mind, and it will not be pleasant, I assure you." "You may do as you must," she said stoically, "but I will not willingly betray the confidences of my queen and mistress." "Confidences she's keeping from me?" "You are better suited to answer that than I, Master." Jace glared at her. She whispered, "Would you prefer if I stood still for the procedure?" Jace shook his head. When push came to shove, he couldn't bring himself to telepathically force intelligence from the loyal Storev. "I don't want to be that guy anymore." "Then may I go?" Storev asked. Jace nodded. "Thank you, Master Beleren." She glided off, and Jace watched her depart. He had his suspicions about what Vraska might be up to, and if he was right, he'd have an extremely difficult decision on his hands. Chapter 26. Liliana Vess. The ravens were starting to gather again as Liliana approached ever closer to the house of Vess, which had clearly been repaired and restored immaculately. "Who did this? Who gave permission for this desecration of the symbol of my ruin?" Though her despair had hardly gone away, her immediate curiosity held it off for the time being, and she was consciously grateful to have an excuse to think about something else. "Keep it going. Get to the bottom of this. Move." She sensed a magical force at work, which she couldn't quite identify. Another riddle. Once again, the Onaki spirits in the chain veil made their propositions. Unleash us, vessel! We will punish all that trespassers, as we punished the souls of Ravnica. No, don't say that. Instantly, all the guilt and shame and self-disgust came flooding back, practically overwhelming her. She had never been one to wallow or even linger on such emotions. Now it's all I can see. It was tempting to let the veil and its spirits use her as their vessel, not to punish any trespassers, but simply to abdicate all future responsibility for her life. They could hardly do a worse job. "Milady," a voice hissed at her from the shadows. "Now who?" Liliana turned and saw an old woman waving to her from within a corpse of dying skeletal trees. "Milady, over here." "A person?" "Oh, just a person." Distracted once more, Liliana crossed to join the woman. She dressed as a peasant, but had a thick gold collar around her neck. "Who are you to address me?" Liliana said haughtily, just to see if she could still present such a facade. Hopeless, hopeless vanity. "My name's Karen, milady. Karina Temwan. And I'm only trying to help you, save you. Don't go any nearer to that mansion. I beg of you, child." As she spoke, the golden collar began to glow. Liliana could feel waves of heat flowing off it into the night air. The collar was searing the old woman's throat, yet with a grimace she fought through the pain to offer her warning. "It's not safe, young stranger. You must run away before you're caught by my mistress, the mistress of that house." She pointed at the mansion, and then stifled a cry of pain. Liliana could smell the woman's flesh burning under the collar. Karina sank to her knees. "No, stop. Don't do this for me. I can't carry any more weight." Half expecting the woman to disintegrate before her eyes, Liliana began to get angry. She grasped at the emotion, and her face darkening, knelt beside Karina and demanded, "Who is your mistress?" "Give me a target." Karina Temwine shook her head, gasping for breath. "Give me a target," Liliana repeated. "Tell me now, Madame Temwine, who is this mistress of the House of Vess? Give me a target." Karina managed to gasp out, "She is the cursed returned child. She is the hated Liliana Vess." Part 2. Hunters. Chapter 27. Rat. There was a split second when Rat, eyes shut tight, thought, "This isn't so bad." But a split second later, everything changed. Arathia Shakta crossed the blind eternities wrapped in Mistress Kai's cloak and Mistress Kai's arms as instructed. She kept her eyes shut tight and held on for dear life, but the experience was unlike anything she'd ever known or been through before. Rat felt as if her body was bleeding into Kaya's, and she knew her mind had psychically merged with the Mistress for a few seconds that seemed like a blind eternity. For Rat, the sensation was both unpleasant and reassuring. She learned from her companion's own psyche that Mistress Kaya truly cared about Rat and was afraid for her. She also learned that Kaya had lost her cat while planeswalking, which was considerably less reassuring. They became in those moments one being, one entity, not Mistress Kaya and Arathia Shakta, but Kaya and Rat, Rat and Kaya, with no space between where one ended and the other began. The unity was unnerving, enthralling, exciting, terrifying, thrilling, and horrible. It went on forever as their minds and bodies stretched across eternity in an endless dance of partnerless oneness, and the endless dance of us as me. Rat had lost herself and found her other self, She was a guildmaster and gateless, an assassin, a thief, a countess, a vagrant, insignificant and renowned, never allowed to escape the curse of her or their birth, and just when it seemed that his new life form had become permanent, Rat and Kaya abruptly manifested into real space, real time, as Rat and Kaya. They practically threw each other apart, and both wound up on their knees and hands, breathing hard and retching, though neither actually vomited. Rat tried to stand, but found she couldn't. The journey had drained her completely. Apparently, Mistress Kaya was in a similar state. I hate her. What? No. I love her. What she's done for me. What she risked for me. What she's shown me. No one's ever what? That feeling, it's rushing away. Everything was so confusing. Rat had a splitting headache. 'Cause, my head. Our head? It just split. We were one. Now we're two again? Goddess, I'm so confused. Wait? Goddess? What goddess? Kaya's memories, Mistress Kaya's memories, were quickly fading, receding from Rat's consciousness. Perhaps all of her secrets were likewise fading from Kaya's mind. It felt like a great loss, as when she had thought Hekara dead. Kaya was dying away from her, dying out inside her. All that proximity, that complete inclusion, that oneness with someone who cared for her, loved her, was being extinguished. Rat felt tears forming in her eyes. She rolled over onto her back, blinked several times and looked up. A blurry, wet Teo, looking and feeling horribly concerned, was leaning over her. His mouth opened and closed several times soundlessly. Or maybe she just wasn't ready to hear him yet. Eventually, after a few more blinks had blinked away what had made him look blurry and wet, he said, or eventually she heard, Rat? Aretha, are you all right? She nodded, or at least meant to. He spoke again, more slowly. Are you all right? I think so, she managed. She heard her voice. It sounded strange, not at all like Kaya's. Well, of course you don't sound like Kaya. Can I help you up? He asked. In a second. I'm fine too. Thanks for asking. It was Miss Ballard's voice. Rat managed to turn her head and saw Jaya Ballard lying beside her and groaning. She said, I haven't planeswalked this many times in one day since before the mending. From Rat's other side, Mistress Kaya croaked out, Sounds exhausting. Rat turned her head the other way. Kaya, was lying on her side with her eyes closed, chuckling to herself. And how are you, Teo Virata? Rat looked up again. Teo said, I'm fine. I'm fine. He sounded embarrassed about it. And is this Goba Khan? It had better be, Miss Ballard said. Yes, Teo said. We're in the Garden of Order. My order. I mean the Order of the Shield Mage. I'm an acolyte here. Or at least I was. So you see, it's not my garden, though I've spent a considerable amount of time working in it. He was running at the mouth, talking very fast. Who does he think he is? Me? Rat said, You can help me up now. He knelt quickly and slipped his arms under her shoulders, propping her up into a sitting position. He was starting to lift her to her feet, but she said, Easy. This'll do for now, thanks. He said, Right, and held still for her. She made an effort to breathe, to feel herself breathing again as just the rat. She looked around. They were indeed in a garden, and carefully tended garden. She looked around. They were indeed in a garden, a carefully tended garden of root vegetables and succulents, of grapevines, and a handful of fruit trees. It wasn't exactly of Celestian quality, but it was clear that someone, or many someones, had worked very hard to maintain it. Teo included, apparently. The sky was a cloudless pale blue. Twin suns were low on the horizon. It was early morning, or maybe late afternoon. Wait, twin suns? We're on Gobakon, aren't we? Yes. We're on another world. Now you know how I feel. This is amazing. I promise you that Gobakon is not nearly as amazing as Ravnica. I fear you'll be bored here quite soon. I doubt that. It's true, Ravnica is full of wonders. Gobakon is dull as sand, like me, I suppose. You're like Gobakon? Yes, too much like Gobakon. Does that mean I'm like Ravnica? To me, you are Ravnica. She punched him, but she was still weak. He didn't even say ow. Am I full of wonders? She asked him, looking away. Full of wonders. She punched him again. Full of something. Anyway, the both of us. I'm only getting one side of this conversation, Miss Ballard said, and I still want to tell this boy to get a room. Oh, stop being so grumpy, Mistress Kai said. Try to remember your first planeswalk. My first planeswalk was not nearly as so pleasant. Then try to remember your first pleasant one. Despite herself, Miss Ballard chuckled. Fine, she said. I will endeavor to be less of a curmudgeon. How was your first intentional planeswalk, boy? Teo looked adorably embarrassed again. I'm not sure, I should say. Why not? Because the three of you all seemed so beaten down by it. Mistress Kaya said, How was it, Teo? He laughed. Exhilarating? Thrilling. I don't think I have the words, but I'd like to do it again. I am not going anywhere for at least a few hours, Miss Ballard said, with a curmudgeonly wave of an arm. Rat was studying him. She said, You're worried about what comes next. What our reception will be like. Somewhat reluctantly he nodded. She looked around. It'll be all right. This is where you were raised, and you came out okay. So there must be good folks here. Yeah. I mean, you know what my crazy life is like? And I can always go home and find welcome. There are people there who love you. So, there must be people here that love you. He looked down and bit his lip. Clearly, he wasn't sure that was true. She took his hand and squeezed it. He looked up and smiled at her gratefully. There are people here who love you now. One person at least. Teo? All four of them turned. A young minotaur, dressed exactly as Teo was dressed, stood 5 yards away, staring at his fellow acolyte. Oh, hi, Piran, Teo said sheepishly. By the storm! What happened to you? We all thought you were dead. Chapter 28. Liliana Vess. Karina Temoin continued to urge Liliana Vess to flee Caligo before Liliana Vess caught and collared her. The more she spoke against her mistress, the hotter her collar became. What does this mean? Your words, they trigger this punishment? Liliana asked, with more fascination than horror. That's fairly sophisticated spellwork. Karina nodded and winced in pain. I'm not supposed to speak against the mistress, but milady, please, you must not stay. I wouldn't wish this life on my worst enemy. I know the feeling. Not even on Liliana Vess, Liliana Vess said. Because I might. Well, Karina grimaced. Maybe I'd make an exception for that one. The collar glowed brightly, and the woman bit her hand hard enough to draw blood in order to stifle her cry of pain. More pain in service to Liliana Vess. Suddenly, Liliana realized what an unfeeling excuse for a human being she was. Stop talking, she urged the servant. Here, let me help you. Liliana grasped Karina's bleeding hand in hers, pulling mana from the blood and willing that energy up to the woman's neck and throat. It seemed to soothe the burn. Well, look at that. I'm good for something. Karina's eyes went wide. You're a healer, milady. A healer, please. Though I studied to be a healer once, less than 100 yards from here, more than 100 yards from here. Something like that, Liliana responded. Of course, all she had done was redirect the woman's own life force to address the more significant source of pain. It was a zero-sum game, but it had served its purpose, and Liliana felt somewhat better herself, somewhat better about herself for having done it. Where can I take you? Let me do one good thing. Karina shook her head, clearly about to urge Liliana to run away. No, Liliana said. Don't speak. I understand. But I can't leave you here in this condition. There must be somewhere I can take you, madame. One good thing. The woman looked on Liliana with pity and some little gratitude. The first and last person to do that in a few decades. Finally, Karina nodded her head toward an outbuilding a few hundred yards from the mansion. Supporting the old woman, Liliana helped her along. It continued to actually feel good to help her. I must be pathetically needy. As they drew closer, Liliana attempted to still her thoughts and asked, The servants' quarters? Karina nodded again. They entered. It was a kind of bunkhouse. There must have been nearly 100 souls living in these cramped quarters. Most were asleep. A few were preparing to sleep. A few more were getting up to do whatever service was required of them. Every single one wore a gold collar, exactly like Madame Temoin's. These aren't servants. They're prisoners. Tell me what happened here, Liliana commanded. A passing servant looked instantly panicked and shook her head violently to warn Karina off from speaking. Another woman said, Who is this woman? I think I've seen her in town, said a third. Of course, none of them thought for a moment that she might be Liliana Vess. Karina said, I found her stumbling through the swamp. She was headed for the mansion. Then let her, said an old man who was pulling on his boots. Just tell me what happened, Liliana repeated. Certainly you can relate plain facts without saying anything that would result in punishment. Karina seemed to consider this. Then she nodded. Yes, if I choose my words carefully, I should be all right. Please, I don't want you to hurt yourself for my sake. I have enough guilt. Thank you very much. Karina shook her self-bitten hand. Now that her neck burns had eased, it was clearly smarting, but she managed to ignore it. Let's see, she began. I believe it started just after word came of the destruction of the Cabal's Lich Knight. Yes, Liliana said as neutrally as she could manage. I've heard of him. I'd heard of his demise. Liliana knew that the Lich Knight referred to was Josu. He had been her first victim. She had loved her brother dearly, and had sought to save his life, but instead she had cursed him with madness, and had been forced to kill him herself. The Cabal later raised him as a lich, and Liliana had been forced to kill him all over again. But as he had died for the second and final time, he had told her she was a curse upon their family. A curse upon anyone or anything I ever care about, even, especially, upon myself. For a brief time, Karina was saying, life in Caligo was good, but nature must indeed abhor a vacuum, or at least evil does. Will-o'-the-wisps began appearing every night in unusually high numbers. I'm sure you know the story. Story? From the fall of the House of Vess. Everyone knows it. Liliana swallowed hard and said, It's been some time for me. Could you refresh my memory? Karina laughed ruefully. I certainly can. I know the tale by heart, I do. My old Nan read it to me on stormy nights when I was young, to keep me in my bed. Did it work? On me? Yes. Others weren't as cautious. Or as wise. Karina nodded her thanks, and then looked toward the ceiling, summoning up the passage, which she then recited from memory. On dark nights you can still see the light of the Vess girl's lantern out in the Caligo, seeking her lost brother. Those who follow are doomed to join her endless search. Liliana wondered who had authorized this fall of the House of Vess, and how she or he had gotten everything so wrong and so right simultaneously. Karina said, Everyone knows this passage, and no one was foolish enough to follow the wisps, but this time we didn't have to follow them. They converged at the cemetery, and she appeared. Who? The curse of the House of Vess. Liliana? Liliana asked with renewed fascination. Liliana, Karina confirmed. Other servants began to back away. The old man with the boots warned Karina. Watch your tongue, you old fool! I speak no treason by simply relating what happened, Karina said in a secretive whisper that indicated less confidence than she pretended to. Besides, I think the mistress likes for folks to know who she is. The fact that Karina's collar wasn't heating up seemed to confirm her conclusion. For now. Liliana's first servants were the raised dead, long dead. Thankfully, no one we loved or even recognized as having died in our lifetime was abused in this way. Thankfully, Liliana echoed. I assume there was a fight. Of course, but Liliana Vess's zombies were capable of surviving blow after blow without the slightest damage. You mean they took the damage and kept coming? No, milady. I meant what I said. They were invulnerable. Invulnerable zombies? We were all forced to surrender. Collars were placed around our necks, and we were forced to serve, to rebuild the mansion, farm, the lands, everything. I don't understand. Why does this Liliana need living thralls if she has undead servants? Did she release them back to their graves? I have no idea where most of her undead minions went. A few still guard her person, but the rest just disappeared. I see. She has a few with her now? Right now? Half a dozen or so, right across the grass in the main house. Liliana reached out then with her magics, but could sense no undead activity in the area. None. Period. This is all very strange. Karina said, Will you go, milady? Liliana didn't answer. She thought about Karina's story for a long time. Finally, she said, I want to meet this Liliana Vess.